Welcome back to Eva's Whisper. Today, I am sharing a real-life story that will strike a chord with anyone who has spent a lifetime building a secure retirement, only to watch family try to tear it down out of sheer greed. Listen closely, because the events that unfold here are a harsh reality for far too many folks today. My husband did not even wait for the emergency room triage nurse to bring out a wheelchair. He just dropped his 78-year-old father at the curb, yelled something out the open window about a non-refundable tea time, and peeled out of the hospital parking lot. It was a Tuesday afternoon, right around 2 o'clock. I was sitting at my desk at the logistics company where I have worked for the last 15 years, knee-deep in inventory reports. My cell phone started vibrating on the desk. I did not recognize the number. It was local, but not one saved in my contacts. Normally, I let those go to voicemail, figuring it is just someone trying to sell me something I do not need. But a weird feeling washed over me, and something told me I needed to answer this one. "Hello, is this Clara?" the voice on the other end asked. The woman sounded completely exhausted. "This is Brenda. I am the charge nurse down at Mercy General Hospital in the emergency department. We have your father-in-law, Walter, here." My heart instantly dropped into my stomach. "Walter? Is he okay? What happened to him?" "He took a bad fall at his house," Brenda said, her tone softening just a little bit, but still clearly clipped with professional frustration. "He has a severe sprained wrist and some very deep bruising on his right hip. He is going to be all right, but honey, I need you to come get him. Your husband dropped him off at the curb about an hour ago, refused to park the car, and drove away. Walter has just been sitting here in the waiting room by himself." I literally stopped breathing for a second. The office chatter around me faded into a dull buzz. "Wait, Rick dropped his own father off at the emergency room and just left?" "Yes, ma'am." Brenda sighed heavily. "He told the orderly he had a golf game he absolutely could not miss. I am sorry to be so blunt with you, but we need someone here to sign his discharge papers and help him get home safely. He cannot drive himself." "I am on my way right now," I said, already grabbing my purse and keys off the desk. "Please tell Walter I will be right there." The drive to Mercy General usually takes about 20 minutes, but today it felt like hours. My mind was racing a mile a minute, trying to make sense of what the nurse had just told me. Rick leaving his injured dad at the hospital to go play 18 holes of golf? It sounded completely insane, but at the same time, a cold, sickening realization was starting to wash over me. The warning signs had been flashing right in front of my face for months. Walter was a good, decent man, a proud man. He was a retired union machinist who spent 40 years working his fingers to the bone on a hot factory floor. He was the kind of guy who packed a simple sandwich in a metal lunchbox every single day, so he could put away a little extra money into his retirement accounts. He paid off his modest ranch house 20 years ago. He bought his cars used and drove them straight into the ground. Because of all that hard work, discipline, and sacrifice, Walter was sitting on a very comfortable, very secure retirement nest egg. He had planned it perfectly. He had spent decades poring over his statements, reading up on sensible financial planning, and making sure he had a rock-solid safety net. He would always tell me that the greatest gift you can give your kids is making sure they never have to wipe your chin or pay your bills when you get old. He lived by that rule. He sacrificed luxury during his working years for total security and independence in his golden years. But lately, Rick had been talking about Walter's money like it belonged to him. "He is just sitting on it, Clara," Rick would complain loudly after we visited his dad for Sunday dinner. What does an old man need with all that cash in the bank? He does not go on vacations. He does not buy anything nice. Meanwhile, we are drowning in credit card debt and paying through the nose for everything. Rick saw his father's security as a jackpot waiting to be claimed. Rick had racked up almost $30,000 in credit card debt buying high-end golf clubs, expensive dinners out with his buddies, and a sports car we had absolutely no business leasing. He wanted a bailout. He wanted the easy way out, and he had somehow convinced himself that his dad owed it to him. I had always shut him down immediately. "It is your dad's money, Rick," I would tell him firmly. "He earned every penny of it. It is there to protect him, to pay for his health care, and to give him peace of mind. We are adults, and we can manage our own bills." Rick would just scoff and roll his eyes, muttering under his breath about how Walter was being cheap and selfish. Over the last few weeks, Rick's petty complaints had turned into this relentless, buzzing resentment. He complained every single time he had to go over and mow Walter's lawn. He complained when he had to help him fix a leaky pipe under the kitchen sink. He constantly called it a burden. I just chalked it up to Rick being impatient and stressed out from his own job. I never in a million years thought my husband was capable of actual physical abandonment. I never thought he could look at the man who raised him, see him injured, scared, and bleeding, and just drive away. I pulled into the hospital parking lot, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were completely white. The afternoon sun was beating down on the windshield, but I felt freezing cold inside. I threw the car in park and practically sprinted through the sliding glass doors of the emergency room. The waiting room was exactly what you would expect. It smelled like strong bleach and stale coffee. There were people coughing, babies crying, and a television bolted to the wall blaring daytime game shows. And there, sitting in the corner on a stiff, uncomfortable vinyl chair, was Walter. Seeing him like that absolutely broke my heart into pieces. Walter had always been a towering, sturdy figure in my life. Even at 78, he stood tall, always wearing his neatly pressed flannel shirts and blue jeans, his silver hair combed back perfectly. He was fiercely independent and strong. But right now, he looked so incredibly small. He was hunched over, holding his right arm close to his chest, which was now wrapped tightly in a thick ace bandage. His clothes were rumpled, and he had a dark, nasty smudge of dirt on his cheek from where he must have hit the floor in his house. But it was his eyes that really got me. He was staring blankly at the ugly linoleum floor. He did not look like a man in physical pain. He looked completely and utterly defeated. His pride was shattered. The utter indignity of being dumped like a piece of unwanted luggage by his own flesh and blood had crushed his spirit in a way a physical fall never could. I walked over quickly and knelt down right in front of him, ignoring the dirt on the floor. "Walter," I said softly, putting my hand gently on his good knee. He blinked slowly and looked up at me. His eyes were red, welling up with tears that he was fighting desperately to hold back. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. "Hey, kiddo," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I am so sorry they bothered you at work. I told the nurses I could just call a cab to get home." "Do not be ridiculous, Walter," I said, forcing a warm smile, even though my blood was practically boiling with anger at my husband. "You know I would drop anything for you. You are not a bother to me. You are family." I stood up and went over to the triage desk. Nurse Brenda was there, and when I introduced myself, she gave me a look of deep, genuine sympathy. She handed me a thick stack of discharge papers attached to a clipboard. "The doctor took x-rays and said there are no broken bones," she explained, pointing a pen to the bottom line for my signature. "Just a severe sprain and some deep tissue bruising. He needs to ice his hip, take some over-the-counter pain medication, and follow up with his primary care doctor in a couple of days." Honestly, he is very lucky. At his age, a fall like that can easily mean a broken hip, surgery, and a long trip to a rehabilitation facility. I quickly signed the papers, thanking her profusely for her help. "You take good care of him," Brenda said quietly, leaning over the counter a bit closer to me. "He is a very sweet old man. He did not deserve what happened to him today." "I know," I replied, my voice tight with emotion. "Believe me, I know." I walked back over to the vinyl chair and gently helped Walter to his feet. He winced in obvious pain as he put weight on his bruised right hip, leaning heavily on my shoulder for support. I wrapped my arm tightly around his waist, supporting him as we made our slow, painful march toward the sliding glass doors. We stepped out into the blinding afternoon sun, the automatic doors sliding shut behind us. Neither of us said a word as we made our way across the asphalt to my car. The silence between us was incredibly heavy, thick with all the things we were both thinking, but were too afraid to say out loud. My mind was reeling, trying to figure out exactly how I was going to confront Rick when I finally got home. How do you look at a man you promised to spend your life with after he does something so incredibly heartless? But as I opened the passenger door and carefully helped Walter ease into the seat, my mind was entirely focused on just getting him home and making him comfortable. I genuinely thought the worst part of this Tuesday was already behind us. I was dead wrong. I managed to get the passenger side door of my SUV open, and I practically had to hold my breath as I helped Walter ease his way into the seat. He was trying so hard to be brave, but I could hear the sharp intake of air through his teeth every time he moved his bruised hip. I reached across him, pulled the seatbelt over his chest, and clicked it into place. He smelled like hospital soap and Old Spice aftershave, but there was a nervous sweat on his brow that broke my heart all over again. I shut his door gently, walked around the front of the car, and climbed into the driver's seat. The afternoon heat inside the car was stifling. I cranked the air conditioning all the way up, letting the cool breeze wash over us. For a long minute, neither of us said a word. The silence was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I reached out and tapped the screen on my dashboard, pulling up the navigation system. I started typing in the address to his house, planning to get him home, get some ice on that hip, and figure out how on earth I was going to handle my husband when he finally walked through the front door. But just as my finger hovered over the screen to hit the start button, Walter reached out. He placed his heavy, trembling hand flat on the dashboard. I turned to look at him. His jaw was set, and his eyes had lost that defeated, glassy look from the waiting room. A sudden, sharp clarity had taken over. He looked me dead in the eye, and his voice was steadier than it had been all afternoon. "Do not take me home, Clara. Take me to my attorney." I just stared at him for a second, completely caught off guard. "Your attorney? Walter, you just got out of the emergency room. You are hurt. You need to go home and rest. We can call Bob Davis on Monday morning." "No," Walter said firmly, dropping his hand back into his lap. "Monday is too late. If I go back to that house right now, Rick is going to show up demanding signatures again, and I am done fighting him on my own. I need to lock this down today. Take me to Bob Davis right now, Clara. Please." I put the car in reverse, backed out of the parking space, and pulled out onto the main road, heading toward the commercial district across town. My mind was spinning. I kept my eyes on the traffic, but I could not hold back the questions anymore. "What do you mean, demanding signatures?" I asked, gripping the steering wheel. "Walter, what is going on? What happened this morning before you fell?" Walter let out a long, heavy sigh. He leaned his head back against the headrest and watched the trees roll by out the window. When he finally spoke, his voice was laced with a sadness so deep it actually made my chest ache. "He did not just drop me off because of a golf game, kiddo," Walter said quietly. That was just his excuse. He left me sitting in that waiting room as a punishment. I felt my stomach drop completely. A punishment? For what? "For refusing to give him my house," Walter replied, turning his head to look at me. "Your husband has been on my back for 3 solid weeks. Every time he comes over to mow the lawn or fix a light bulb, he brings a folder full of legal papers. He had some cut-rate online lawyer draft up a quitclaim deed for my property, along with a document that gives him broad, immediate financial power of attorney. He wants complete control over my bank accounts, my retirement funds, and the deed to the house." I nearly slammed on the brakes. I knew Rick was bad with money. I knew he complained about his dad being cheap, but this was entirely different. This was predatory. "Are you serious?" I gasped, shaking my head in disbelief. "How did he even try to justify that to you?" "He tried to play it off as smart financial planning," Walter chuckled, though there was absolutely no humor in the sound. "He told me he was just looking out for my best interests. He gave me this whole big speech about Medicaid planning. He said that if I ever needed to go into a nursing home, the government would seize all my assets and take the house to pay for it. He kept lecturing me about the 5-year look-back period for Medicaid, telling me that if I did not sign the house and the money over to him right this second, I was going to lose it all to the state anyway." Walter paused, taking a slow breath. He was a smart man. He had spent his entire adult life making sure his retirement was secure, and he knew the rules backward and forward. "The thing is, Clara, I already planned for all of that," Walter continued, his voice growing stronger, fueled by righteous anger. "I saved my money precisely so I would never have to rely on Medicaid or a state-run nursing facility. I have enough tucked away to hire private, in-home care if I ever need it. I told Rick that. I told him my retirement was my safety net, not his piggy bank." "What did he say to that?" I asked, feeling sick to my stomach. Walter looked down at his bandaged wrist. "He got angry. But the real kicker happened 2 days ago. Rick thought I was asleep in my recliner, and he took a phone call on my back porch. My hearing is a lot sharper than I let on, Clara. I heard every single word. I held my breath, waiting for the rest of the story as we stopped at a red light. "He was talking to a real estate agent," Walter said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "He was asking about how fast they could list my house once the quitclaim deed was filed. Then, he started talking to the agent about a lake house property up north, a vacation cabin. He was planning to liquidate my entire life savings, take the cash from the sale of my home, and buy himself a lake house." "Oh my God!" I breathed out, horrified. "What about you? Where did he think you were going to live?" Walter swallowed hard, and for the first time, a single tear escaped and rolled down his weathered cheek. "I heard him say that once the money was in his name, he would declare me legally destitute. He found some bottom-of-the-barrel, state-funded facility 2 counties over. That was his grand plan, Clara. Steal my life savings to buy a vacation home and dump his own father in a ward to rot." The light turned green, but it took the person behind me honking their horn to make me press the gas pedal. I was shaking. The sheer, calculated malice of it was beyond anything I could have ever imagined. The man I slept next to every night had coldly plotted to strip his elderly father of his dignity, his home, and his life savings, all to fund a lifestyle he refused to work for himself. This morning, before he took his golf clubs out of the trunk, he slapped that folder on my kitchen counter and told me to sign it. Walter said, finishing the story. "I told him to go to hell. I told him I would burn the money in the backyard before I let him steal it. I got so worked up I lost my footing and I fell hard on the kitchen tile. Rick did not even help me up right away. He just picked up his folder, grabbed my arm, and dragged me out to his car. When we got to the hospital, he practically pushed me out onto the curb and told me to call him when I was ready to stop being so stubborn. A white-hot fury exploded in my chest. It all made perfect sense now. Leaving Walter alone at the emergency room was not a matter of a scheduled tea time. It was an extortion tactic. Rick honestly believed that leaving a 78-year-old man injured and alone would break his spirit. He thought Walter would be so scared and so desperate that he would sign whatever papers Rick put in front of him just to have a safe place to go home to. He severely underestimated his father, and he severely underestimated me. "We are almost there, Walter," I said, my voice cold as ice but steady as a rock. I gripped the steering wheel, my mind suddenly crystal clear about what needed to happen next. "We are going to walk into Bob Davis' office, and we are going to make sure Rick never gets his hands on a single red cent." Walter looked over at me, and a small, relieved smile finally touched the corners of his mouth. "Thank you, Clara. I knew you were the smart one in the family." The blistering afternoon sun beat down on the windshield as I pulled my SUV into the small, sun-baked parking lot of a brick strip mall on the edge of town. The sign above the glass door read, "Robert Davis, Attorney at Law," in simple gold lettering. I parked as close to the wheelchair ramp as I could possibly get, throwing the car into park and letting out a long, shaky breath. My hands were still trembling a little bit from the adrenaline and the sheer shock of everything Walter had just confessed to me in the car. I walked around to the passenger side and opened the door. Walter was staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched tight. I reached in and gently helped him swing his feet out, taking most of his weight as he eased himself up. He hissed a little as his bruised hip took the pressure, but he did not complain once. I grabbed a wheelchair that was sitting just inside the glass doors of the lobby, got him settled into it, and pushed him straight up to the receptionist's desk. The law office was wonderfully cool, smelling faintly of old paper and lemon furniture polish. Bob Davis came walking out to the waiting room almost immediately. Bob was a man in his late 60s, wearing a pair of reading glasses perched on the end of his nose and a comfortable-looking tweed sport coat. He had been Walter's estate attorney for over 20 years. He was the man who helped Walter draft his very first will shortly after his wife passed away. Bob took one look at Walter sitting in the wheelchair, wrapped in a thick ace bandage, and his warm, welcoming smile immediately vanished. He ushered us straight back into his large corner office, closing the heavy wooden door behind us to shut out the rest of the world. I parked Walter right next to a massive oak desk and took a seat on a soft leather sofa nearby. Honestly, I was expecting a very tense, incredibly boring meeting. I figured we were in for a long, drawn-out lecture full of confusing financial jargon, the kind of legal talk that makes your eyes glaze over. I thought Bob was going to pull out giant binders and start throwing around tax codes and complicated clauses that nobody but a lawyer could actually understand. But I was completely wrong. What I witnessed in that office was an absolute masterclass in a man taking total, uncompromising control over his own life's work. Walter did not beat around the bush. He sat tall in that wheelchair, completely sharp and perfectly clear-headed. "Bob," Walter said, his voice steady and commanding. "My son tried to force me to sign a quitclaim deed on my house this morning. When I refused, he dumped me at the emergency room. I need to make absolutely sure that boy cannot touch a single dime of my money, and I need it done today." Bob did not gasp or act shocked. He just nodded slowly, pulled a fresh yellow legal pad across his desk, and picked up his favorite pen. "All right, Walter," Bob said calmly. "Let us cut right to the chase. We are going to lock the doors and board up the windows on your estate right now." There was no lecture-style financial presentation. There was no confusing legal mumbo-jumbo. Bob explained everything in simple, everyday American English that anyone could easily understand, ensuring everything was completely accurate without making it sound like a dry college textbook. "First things first," Bob explained, leaning forward on his elbows. "We are drafting an immediate revocation of any power of attorney Rick might think he has, or might try to forge in the future. We are sending a certified copy to your bank, your retirement fund managers, and the local hospital network. He will not be able to make a single financial or medical decision for you. He will be completely locked out." Walter nodded firmly. "Do it." "Next," Bob continued, tapping his pen on the desk, "we are taking your house, your savings, and your retirement accounts, and we are moving all of it into an irrevocable trust. Think of this trust like a heavy steel vault. Once your money goes inside the vault, you lock the door and throw away the key. Because it is irrevocable, you no longer legally own those assets directly. The trust owns them. And because you do not own them, Rick cannot sue you for them, and he certainly cannot pressure you into handing them over. The money in that trust will be strictly designated to pay for your living expenses, your property taxes, and any top-tier and home nursing care you might need as you get older." I sat on the couch, just listening in pure awe. It was so brilliantly simple. Rick had been obsessing over Medicaid look-back periods and nursing home state seizures, trying to scare his dad into handing over the cash. But Walter was using the actual law to build an impenetrable fortress around his hard-earned money. He was ensuring that his lifetime of factory work would protect his golden years, exactly the way he always planned. "If Rick tries to challenge this in court down the line, claiming I was not in my right mind today?" Walter asked, narrowing his eyes. "Let him try," Bob scoffed, a confident grin spreading across his face. "I am making meticulous notes right here, right now, attesting to your full mental capacity. You are as sharp as a tack, Walter. Any judge in this county would take one look at this trust and throw Rick right out of the courtroom. He is not getting his hands on a single penny." Bob called his paralegal into the office and started dictating the paperwork immediately. It was incredibly fast. Within 30 minutes, there were thick stacks of freshly printed documents sitting on the oak desk. Walter read through every single page carefully, and then he signed his name on the dotted lines with a steady hand. With every stroke of the pen, I could literally see the heavy burden lifting off his shoulders. He was taking his power back. Then Bob pulled out one final document. "All right, Walter," Bob said, his voice softening just a bit. "We have secured the money. We have secured the house. But we still need to establish your healthcare proxy. If you are ever incapacitated, or if you end up in the hospital and cannot speak for yourself, we need to legally designate someone who can make medical decisions on your behalf. Since we are completely cutting Rick out, we need a name." The room went completely quiet for a moment. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning vent in the ceiling. Walter did not even hesitate. He slowly turned his wheelchair around to face me. He looked at me with those kind, tired eyes, and I could see a deep well of emotion rising up in them. "Clara," Walter said softly, his voice trembling just a little bit. "I would like it to be you, if you are willing." I felt a massive lump form in my throat. I was entirely caught off guard. I just stared at him, my eyes suddenly welling up with tears. "Walter, are you sure? I mean, I am your daughter-in-law, but—" "You are family, Clara," Walter interrupted gently. He reached out his good hand, and I stood up from the sofa and stepped over to take it. His grip was surprisingly strong. You are more family to me today than my own flesh and blood. When I was hurt, when I was sitting alone in that hospital feeling like my whole life was falling apart, you came running. She is the only one who actually showed up when I could not stand," he said, turning back to look at the lawyer. "Put her name on the paper, Bob." A hot tear spilled over my eyelashes and rolled down my cheek. I squeezed his hand, completely overwhelmed by the immense amount of trust this proud, incredible man was placing in me. After everything his own son had just put him through, Walter still had the capacity to trust, to see who truly cared about him. "I would be honored, Walter," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I promise you, I will always look out for you." Bob smiled warmly, typed my name into the legal document, and printed it out. I signed the proxy form, making it official. We spent another hour in that cool office, wrapping up all the loose ends, making sure every single legal loophole was tightly closed. By the time we finally rolled out of Bob Davis' office and back into the sweltering late afternoon heat, everything had changed. Rick thought he was going to break his father today. He thought he was going to waltz into a massive inheritance and buy himself a fancy lake house on his dad's dime. But instead, Rick had just completely and permanently written himself out of his father's life. I helped Walter back into my car, feeling a profound sense of relief. The money was safe. Walter was safe. But as I started the engine and put the car in drive, a cold, hard knot formed in the pit of my stomach. Now, I had to go home and face the man I married. I had to look Rick in the eye, knowing exactly what kind of monster he really was. The drive back from the law office was quiet, but it was a completely different kind of quiet than before. The heavy, suffocating panic from earlier in the afternoon was gone. In its place was a solid, undeniable sense of relief. We pulled into Walter's driveway just as the late afternoon sun was starting to cast long shadows across his perfectly manicured lawn. This house was Walter's pride and joy. It was a classic mid-century ranch, brick front, with a neatly trimmed oak tree in the front yard. He had bought it 40 years ago, raised his family in it, and paid off the mortgage 2 decades ago. Walking up to the front door, you could just feel the history and the hard work that held the foundation together. It was not a mansion, not by a long shot, but it was safe. It was his, and it was entirely paid for. I helped Walter out of the passenger seat, taking my time to make sure he had a good solid grip on my arm before putting weight on his bad hip. We walked slowly up the concrete path. Once we got inside the front door, the familiar smell of floor wax and old books wrapped around us like a warm blanket. "Let us get you off your feet, Walter," I said softly, guiding him right into the living room. I helped him ease down into his favorite brown leather recliner. He let out a long, heavy sigh as he finally took the weight off his bruised hip, his head sinking back into the soft cushion. I grabbed a knitted throw blanket from the back of the sofa and draped it over his legs, then headed straight into the kitchen. The man had not eaten a single thing since breakfast, and dealing with lawyers and emergency rooms takes a lot out of a person. I opened the fridge and threw together a simple ham and cheese sandwich on wheat bread, poured a tall glass of iced tea, and brought it out to him on a small wooden tray. "Here you go," I said, setting the tray carefully on the side table next to his chair. "You need to eat something, and then I am going to get you some ice for that hip." Walter looked down at the sandwich, then looked up at me. His eyes were heavy, tired in a way that goes way deeper than just missing a few hours of sleep. "Thank you, Clara. Really, for everything you did today." I pulled up a small wooden footstool and sat down right across from him. "You do not ever have to thank me for that, Walter. I just cannot believe it came to this. I cannot believe Rick would actually do something so awful to his own father. Walter picked up the glass of iced tea and took a slow sip. The silence stretched out for a minute as he gathered his thoughts. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Aging is a funny thing, kiddo," Walter said gently, staring down at his glass. "When you are young, you think you have all the time in the world. You think you are invincible. But you blink, and suddenly your knees ache when it rains, and you are terrified of slipping on a wet floor. I saw what happened to my own parents when they got older. They did not plan ahead. They did not save. When my dad got sick, the medical bills bankrupted them. My mom spent her last years in a terrible crowded state facility because they had absolutely nothing left to their name." He paused, taking a bite of his sandwich, chewing slowly. I just sat there, hanging on his every word. I promised myself I would never let that happen to me, and I would never put that kind of financial burden on my kids, he continued. That is exactly why I worked all those double shifts at the factory. That is why I drove a rusty pickup truck for 15 years instead of buying a shiny new car every couple of years. I did not care about having fancy things or taking expensive vacations. I cared about having a safety net. I wanted to make absolutely sure that if my health failed, I could afford to pay for my own care, in my own home, without asking anyone for a handout. He looked around the living room, taking in the faded wallpaper and the old heavy television set in the corner. I sacrificed a lot of luxury over the decades to build that nest egg, Walter said, his voice cracking just a little bit. It was supposed to be my peace of mind. But my own son looks at this house and sees a piggy bank. He looks at my savings account and sees a quick fix for his own careless mistakes. He does not see 40 years of sweat and sore muscles. He just sees a dollar sign. Hearing the absolute heartbreak in his voice felt like a physical punch to my gut. The sheer, calculated greed of it all was sickening. Rick had never once asked his dad about his financial goals. He had never once offered to sit down and help Walter figure out a realistic long-term care plan. All Rick cared about was cashing in before the money was gone. Sitting there on that little footstool, listening to this good, honest man pour his heart out, a massive realization came crashing down on me. It was an epiphany that shook me to my absolute core. I had spent the last 5 years making excuses for my husband. When Rick leased that ridiculous sports car we could not afford, I told myself he just needed to blow off some steam from his stressful job. When he maxed out 2 joint credit cards on expensive golf trips with his buddies, I told myself he would eventually grow out of it and learn how to stick to a household budget. I had spent years convincing myself that Rick was just a little irresponsible, maybe a little immature. But looking around Walter's meticulously kept modest home, the ugly truth became impossible to ignore. I work hard for my paycheck at the logistics company. Walter worked his entire life for his security. Rick was not just bad with money. He was entirely devoid of empathy. My husband was a man who felt entitled to things he did not earn. He felt entitled to his father's life savings. He felt entitled to dump a hurt elderly man at the hospital curb because dealing with him was too inconvenient for his weekend plans. If Rick could treat the man who raised him with such cold, calculated cruelty, how on earth could I ever trust him to take care of me? If I ever got seriously sick, or if we ever faced a real crisis in our marriage, would Rick just drop me at the curb too? The illusions I had built around my marriage started crumbling right there in Walter's living room. The foundation of our relationship was not built on partnership or mutual respect. It was built on me constantly cleaning up Rick's financial and emotional messes while he looked for the next easy payout. I realized with absolute clarity that I was married to a man who viewed people as nothing more than an ATM. And the very moment that ATM stopped dispensing cash, he walked away. "I am so sorry, Walter," I whispered, wiping a stray tear from my cheek. "You did everything right. You planned perfectly. Rick is the one who is broken, not you." Walter reached out and patted my knee gently. "Do not cry for me, Clara. Thanks to you and Bob Davis, I am fully protected now. My future is secure. The only thing I am worried about now is you." He looked deep into my eyes, and I knew he could see the wheels turning in my head. He knew exactly what I was finally realizing about his son. "You are a smart, capable woman, Clara," Walter said firmly. "Do not ever let anyone drag you down with them. You deserve a real partner who respects you, not a boy who expects you to carry his dead weight." I took a deep, shaky breath, letting his profound words sink in. He was exactly right. He had spent his whole life protecting his future, and it was high time I started fiercely protecting mine. "I need to go home, Walter," I said softly, standing up and collecting his empty lunch plate. "I need to go pack a bag before Rick gets back from the golf course." Walter gave me a sad, knowing nod. He did not ask any probing questions. He did not try to talk me out of it or ask me to give his son another chance. He just understood. "You have the spare key to my front door on your keychain," Walter said, settling back into his comfortable recliner. "If you need a safe place to stay tonight or any night, you know exactly where I am." "Thank you," I replied, forcing a brave smile. I went over to the freezer, grabbed a bag of frozen peas, wrapped it in a clean dish towel, and gently placed it against his bruised hip. "Keep that on there for 20 minutes. I will call you first thing tomorrow morning to check in." I walked out of Walter's house, the heavy wood front door clicking shut solidly behind me. As I walked back down the concrete path to my SUV, the late afternoon air felt heavy and incredibly humid. The calm safety of Walter's living room was behind me, and I knew exactly what was waiting for me back at my own house. The storm was coming, but for the very first time in my entire marriage, I was not afraid of it. I was finally ready to face the music. The drive from Walter's house back to the neighborhood I shared with Rick felt incredibly surreal. The late afternoon sun was hanging low in the sky, casting long, golden shadows across the suburban streets. People were out walking their dogs and watering their lawns, going about their perfectly normal Tuesday evenings. Everything outside looked entirely ordinary, but inside my car, my entire world had completely shifted. I felt a strange, cold calmness washing over me. The anxiety and the panic that had been choking me all afternoon were completely gone. In their place was a hard, unbreakable resolve. I pulled into our driveway and parked the car. I sat there for a moment, just staring at the front door of the house we had bought together 5 years ago. It did not feel like home anymore. It felt like a place I was just visiting. I grabbed my purse, took a deep breath, and walked inside. The house was quiet. Rick was not back yet. I walked straight into the kitchen and dropped my keys into the ceramic bowl by the door. I pulled the thick stack of legal documents out of my bag, the copies Bob Davis had made for me, and I laid them flat right in the middle of the kitchen island. The smooth granite felt cool under my hands. I went back to the master bedroom, pulled my medium-sized suitcase out of the closet, and laid it open on the bed. I started packing. I did not pack everything, just enough clothes and toiletries to get me through the next week. I was folding a sweater when I heard the heavy rumble of Rick's car pulling into the driveway. The garage door rattled open. I walked out of the bedroom and stood quietly in the kitchen, waiting. A moment later, the door leading from the garage to the kitchen swung wide open. Rick strutted through the door, carrying his heavy leather golf bag over his shoulder. He let it drop to the floor with a loud, obnoxious clatter. He was wearing his expensive designer golf polo and a crisp white visor. His face, arms, and neck were baked bright red from a terrible sunburn, but he looked completely carefree. He was actually humming a song. He did not look like a man who had committed a heinous act of elder abuse just a few hours prior. He looked like a guy who had just enjoyed a fantastic afternoon out with his buddies. He was completely, utterly oblivious. "Hey, babe," Rick said casually, kicking off his golf shoes and leaving them right in the middle of the walkway. He did not even wait for me to answer. He walked straight past me, opened the refrigerator, and grabbed a cold beer. He cracked it open, the sound echoing sharply in the quiet kitchen, and took a long, greedy gulp. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and let out a satisfied sigh. "Man, what a day," Rick said, leaning casually against the kitchen counter. The course was in pristine condition. I shot an 82. Best round I have played all summer. The guys were totally jealous of my new driver. I stood perfectly still on the other side of the kitchen island, just staring at him. I could feel my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm in my chest. "So," Rick continued, taking another sip of his beer and totally ignoring the cold silence hanging in the room. "Did the old man finally call you?" I figure he probably sat in that waiting room for an hour, got a reality check, and called a cab to take him home. He is probably sitting in his recliner right now, licking his wounds and feeling sorry for himself. It was tough love, Clara. He needed it. I guarantee you, by the time I go over there on Monday morning, his spirit will be broken, and he will be begging to sign those power of attorney papers just to keep the peace. Rick let out a short, arrogant laugh. He walked over to the kitchen island, entirely missing the stack of papers sitting there, and started tapping his fingers on the granite. "We need to start figuring out what to do with all his old junk," Rick said, his eyes lighting up with greedy excitement. "The house is going to sell fast once we force it onto the market, but the basement is packed with useless garbage. We should just hire one of those junk removal trucks to come and haul it all to the dump. We can probably sell the antique dining table, though. That might bring in a few $100. Once the house cash clears," I was looking at that lake house property online again. "We can put down a massive cash offer and secure it before the end of the month." He actually smiled at me. He was standing in our kitchen, casually planning how to fence his own father's belongings, completely convinced that he had won. He assumed he had successfully bullied an injured 78-year-old man into giving up his life savings. The sheer audacity of it was absolutely breathtaking. I did not yell. I did not scream. I did not shed a single tear. I was entirely past the point of crying. I stayed ice cold. "Walter did not take a cab home," I said. My voice was dangerously quiet, but it commanded the entire room. Rick stopped tapping his fingers. He looked at me, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What do you mean? Did you go pick him up?" "Clara, I told you to stay out of it. You are going to ruin the whole strategy." I reached out and placed my hand firmly on top of the stack of legal documents. I pushed them across the smooth surface of the kitchen island. They slid perfectly across the granite and stopped right in front of his beer can. "I picked him up from the emergency room," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "And then I drove him straight to Bob Davis' law office. You should read those, Rick." Rick let out an annoyed sigh, setting his beer down. He picked up the heavy packet of papers. "What is this? Did the old fool try to file a police report or something?" He flipped open the first page. I watched him very closely. I watched the arrogant, sunburned smirk completely melt off his face in real time. His eyes darted back and forth across the heavy legal text. The color rapidly drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking sickly pale underneath the red sunburn. He saw the heavy black letters at the top of the page. Irrevocable trust. He flipped to the next page. Revocation of power of attorney? He flipped again and saw my signature on the healthcare proxy form. The reality of what he was holding in his hands hit him like a runaway freight train. The steel vault had been locked, and he was permanently trapped on the outside. "What is this?" Rick whispered, his voice trembling. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with sudden panic. "Clara, what did you do?" "I did not do anything," I replied coldly. "Walter did. He protected himself from you." Rick dropped the papers onto the island like they were on fire. The shock only lasted for about 3 seconds before it morphed into blind, explosive rage. The blow-up happened instantly. He slammed his fist down on the granite counter so hard the beer can rattled. "Are you out of your mind?" Rick screamed, the veins in his neck popping out. "You took him to a lawyer? You went behind my back and helped him lock up my inheritance? That is my money. That is my house. I am his son. I am legally entitled to every single dime of that estate." He started pacing back and forth across the kitchen floor, breathing heavily, completely losing control. "He owes me that money!" Rick shouted, pointing a finger wildly at the papers. "We have $30,000 in credit card debt, Clara. How are we supposed to pay that off now? How am I supposed to buy the lake house? You stole from us. You let that stubborn old fool steal my future." I stood my ground. I did not flinch, and I did not back away. I let him scream until he literally ran out of breath. Then I spoke, and my voice was harder than the granite counter between us. "That money was never yours," I said, spitting the words out with absolute disgust. "It was never your inheritance. It was his safety net. It was 40 years of him breaking his back in a hot factory while you sat around feeling sorry for yourself. He saved that money so he would never have to depend on a state-funded nursing home. He saved it to protect himself." Rick opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off immediately, my voice rising in volume. "You left him at the curb, Rick!" I yelled, finally letting my anger loose. "Your own father!" "He fell and injured himself because you were physically trying to force him to sign away his life, and instead of making sure he was okay, you dumped him at an emergency room and went to play 18 holes of golf. You abandoned a hurt elderly man so you would not miss your tea time. What kind of a monster does that?" Rick stared at me, his mouth hanging open, desperately searching for an excuse that did not exist. "You thought leaving him alone would break his spirit?" I continued, shaking my head in pure disbelief. "You thought he would be so scared that he would just hand over his piggy bank to you? But you underestimated him. And you severely underestimated me." I grabbed my purse from the counter and slung it over my shoulder. "You are a greedy, selfish, pathetic excuse for a man," I told him, holding his gaze until he actually looked away in shame. "I packed my suitcase. I am staying at my friend's apartment. Do not call my phone, and do not ever try to go near your father again. If you set foot on his property, Bob Davis will have you arrested for trespassing." I turned my back on him and walked toward the door. Behind me, the kitchen was dead silent, save for the heavy, ragged sound of Rick finally realizing that he had just lost absolutely everything. I stopped halfway to the door. Rick had followed me, his heavy footsteps slapping aggressively against the hardwood floor. He was not finished. He stepped squarely in front of the entryway, physically blocking my path to the front door. His face was a messy, ugly mixture of sunburned rage and sudden, desperate panic. "You are overreacting, Clara." Rick said, his voice dropping an octave as he completely shifted his tactics. He held his hands up in front of him, palms facing out, like he was trying to calm down an irrational child. You are not looking at the big picture here. You do not understand the financial pressure we are under. I am the one carrying the heavy weight of this household. I am the one trying to secure our future so we do not end up eating cat food when we retire. I just stared at him. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of his words hung heavily in the air between us. Our future? I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low and steady. What future is that exactly, Rick? The one where we buy a fancy vacation cabin up north that we absolutely cannot afford. The one where we are not drowning in $30,000 of credit card debt, Rick yelled, throwing his arms up in the air out of frustration. Do you have any idea how much interest we are paying to the bank every single month? The minimum payments alone are bleeding us dry. We are completely underwater, Clara. I was trying to save us. My dad is sitting on a gold mine that he does not even use. I was doing smart Medicaid planning. I was doing this for us. I was doing this for you. That was the exact moment the final puzzle piece clicked into place. The gaslighting was so blatant, so unbelievably toxic, that it actually made me physically sick to my stomach. He was actively trying to twist his own terrible financial choices and project the blame onto me. He wanted me to feel complicit. He wanted me to actually believe that abandoning his 78-year-old father at the emergency room was somehow a necessary, noble sacrifice to keep our heads above water. But I knew exactly where that $30,000 of debt came from. It did not come from grocery bills, unexpected medical emergencies, or a broken furnace that needed replacing. It came entirely from him. It came from the designer golf clubs, the imported craft beers, the expensive steak dinners at the country club, and the monthly lease on a sports car that he insisted he needed to impress his clients at work. Rick had dug a massive financial grave with his own two hands, entirely fueled by his massive ego and his desperate need to look wealthy to his friends. And when the bills finally caught up with him, he did not humble himself. He did not get a second job on the weekends. He did not sell the sports car or cut up his credit cards. Instead, he looked at his elderly, hard-working father and saw a quick bailout. He resorted to the absolute lowest form of cowardice a person can sink to. He resorted to the severe financial abuse of an elder. I looked at the man standing in front of me, really looked at him, and I realized with crystal clarity that there was absolutely no coming back from this. A marriage can survive a lot of difficult things. It can survive financial hard times, fierce arguments, and long periods of misunderstanding. But it cannot survive a total lack of basic human decency. Watching my husband try to justify extorting his own flesh and blood to fund a fake lifestyle was an absolute, non-negotiable deal-breaker. You did not do this for us, I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. You did this to cover up your own disastrous mess. You are broke, Rick. You lived entirely beyond your means, and instead of being a man and taking responsibility for your own debt, you tried to rob an old man who spent 40 years working on a hot factory floor. You are pathetic. Rick flinched backward like I had physically slapped him across the face. The victim act vanished in a split second, replaced by a dark, incredibly ugly scowl. He finally realized that he could not manipulate me. He could not gaslight his way out of this corner, and he could not convince me that he was the hero of this story. Fine, Rick spat out, stepping aside and waving his hand violently toward the hallway. If you want to choose that stubborn old fool over your own husband, then go. But do not come crawling back to me when he finally kicks the bucket and leaves you with absolutely nothing to show for it." He turned around, grabbed his half-empty beer can off the granite kitchen island, and stormed out the door leading to the garage. The heavy metal fire door slammed shut behind him so hard that the framed pictures on the living room wall actually rattled. I was left standing alone in the sudden, eerie silence of the kitchen. I did not follow him. I'd not say another word. I just turned around and walked back down the hallway to the master bedroom. My hands were completely steady as I walked over to the top shelf of the closet and pulled down a second, much larger suitcase. I laid it out flat on the bed next to the first one I had started. I opened my dresser drawers and began packing in earnest. I meticulously folded my work clothes, my favorite sweaters, my good walking shoes, and every single piece of jewelry I owned that had any sentimental value. I grabbed my important personal paperwork from the small wooden desk in the corner. My birth certificate, my passport, and my past tax documents all went securely into the front zippered pocket of the luggage. Then, I sat on the edge of the mattress, pulled out my smartphone, and opened my banking app. I swiftly transferred my entire personal savings out of our joint account and into a private account in my name only. If Rick was desperate enough to steal from his dad, I was not going to leave my hard-earned paycheck sitting around for him to drain. I had to protect my own financial future now. I did not tear the bedroom apart. I did not throw things against the wall or break any picture frames. There was no loud theatrical scene, and there was no crying on the bedroom floor. The heavy grief of losing my marriage had already been entirely eclipsed by the absolute grounding certainty that I was doing the right thing. It took me about 45 minutes to gather everything I truly needed. I zipped up both heavy suitcases, pulled the extending handles up, and wheeled them out of the bedroom and down the hallway. The house felt completely empty and hollow. I could hear the faint, muffled sound of the garage radio playing through the walls. Rick was out there stewing in his own toxic anger, probably drinking another beer and convincing himself that I would eventually calm down and unpack my bags by morning. I wheeled the luggage to the front door and left the bags right by the entryway. Then, I walked back into the kitchen one last time. The thick stack of legal documents was still sitting right in the middle of the granite kitchen island. The irrevocable trust, the swift revocation of the power of attorney, and the medical healthcare proxy. They were the physical, undeniable proof that Rick's greedy little scheme had been permanently shut down. I looked down at my left hand. The diamond on my ring finger caught the bright light from the kitchen chandelier. We had picked it out together 6 long years ago. At the time, I honestly thought it was a symbol of a long, happy, equal partnership. Now, looking at it just made my stomach turn. It felt incredibly heavy, like a cold metal shackle I was finally giving myself permission to take off. I gripped the wedding ring and slid it slowly over my knuckle. It came off easily. I set it down gently on the smooth granite counter, resting the gold band right on top of the stack of legal papers. It was the most fitting place in the world for it. I walked to the front entryway, grabbed the handles of my suitcases, and pulled them out onto the front porch. I pulled the heavy front door shut behind me, listening closely to ensure the deadbolt clicked securely into place. The evening air had cooled down significantly. The sun was fully setting over the neighborhood, painting the sky in beautiful, deep shades of purple and burnt orange. I loaded my bags into the trunk of my SUV, climbed into the driver's seat, and started the engine. I put the car in reverse and pulled out of the driveway, completely ignoring the closed garage door. I did not look back at the house, even once. I picked up my cell phone from the center console and dialed my best friend, Sarah. She lived in a nice, secure apartment complex just a few miles across town. She answered on the second ring, and I kept it brief. I told her I was coming over and that I needed to crash in her guest room for a few nights. She did not ask for a long, dramatic explanation. She simply told me the front door was unlocked and the coffee pot was already turned on. As I drove through the quiet, darkening suburban streets, heading toward Sarah's place, a profound and unexpected sense of peace washed over my entire body. I knew I had a lot of very difficult days ahead of me. Divorces are never easy, and legally untangling my finances from Rick's disastrous credit card debt was going to be an absolute nightmare. But for the very first time in years, I felt completely in control of my own life. I had helped protect a good, honest man from total financial ruin, and in the process, I had finally found the necessary courage to protect myself. A full week passed since I walked out that front door and left my gold wedding ring sitting on the granite kitchen island. I was comfortably settled into the spare bedroom at my best friend's apartment. For the first time in 5 years, I was waking up every single morning without a heavy knot of anxiety sitting in the pit of my stomach. I drank my coffee in peace, went to my job at the logistics company, and finally felt like I could breathe a huge sigh of relief. But across town, the reality of the situation was finally crashing down on Rick, and he was going into an absolute blind panic. I heard all about his desperate little moves from Walter. I called the old man every single evening just to check on his bruised hip and see if he needed any groceries. Walter was doing just fine. His hip was healing nicely, and he had already interviewed a wonderful part-time nurse to help him out around the house a few days a week. But on Thursday evening, Walter called me with a healthy dose of humor in his voice. "You are not going to believe what my son tried to pull today," Walter told me over the phone, letting out a dry chuckle. "Bob Davis just called me from the law office. Rick actually hired a lawyer." I rolled my eyes so hard they almost got stuck in the back of my head. "A lawyer? With what money?" "He is already drowning in $30,000 of credit card debt. He cannot even afford his own car lease." "He must have put the retainer on another credit card," Walter said, sounding completely unbothered. "He hired one of those sleazy, cut-rate guys who advertise on city bus benches and late-night television. The guy sent a formal letter to Bob Davis this morning. He is trying to challenge the irrevocable trust." I felt a tiny spike of worry. "On what grounds? Can he actually do that?" "He can try, but he is going to fail miserably," Walter replied confidently. "Rick's lawyer claimed that I was not in my right mind when I signed the papers. He tried to argue diminished mental capacity. He also tried to claim that you exerted undue influence over me, saying you manipulated a confused 78-year-old man into changing his estate plan while he was heavily medicated from an emergency room visit." The sheer audacity of my husband was honestly astounding. He was the one who dumped his injured father on the curb for a round of golf, yet he was actually trying to spin the narrative to make me look like the bad guy. He thought he could just bully his way through the legal system the same way he tried to bully his own family. But Rick and his cheap strip mall lawyer ran headfirst into an absolute brick wall. They completely underestimated Bob Davis. Bob did not even break a sweat. He did not invite Rick's lawyer to a meeting or try to negotiate a settlement. He simply fired back a single, incredibly dense legal response that completely shut down the entire circus. Bob informed the cheap lawyer that he had been Walter's estate attorney for 2 solid decades, and he had taken meticulous, time-stamped notes during our meeting, verifying Walter's total mental acuity. Furthermore, the entire staff at the law office had witnessed Walter clearly and sharply outlining his exact wishes. Bob also pointed out that the trust was completely ironclad and already fully funded. There was absolutely no legal loophole to exploit. The vault was sealed shut. Finally, Bob included a very stern warning that if Rick continued to pursue this frivolous claim, Bob would countersue for elder harassment and demand that Rick cover all legal fees. That was the absolute end of it. Rick's sleazy lawyer took one look at Bob Davis' ironclad paperwork, realized there was zero chance of a quick payout, and immediately dropped Rick as a client. The lawyer hit him with a hefty bill for the hours he had already worked, pushing Rick even deeper into the financial hole he had dug for himself. By the end of the second week, Rick's financial reality finally caught up to him with a vengeance. The golden goose he had been banking on was completely gone, and more importantly, my paycheck was entirely out of his reach. For our entire marriage, my income at the logistics company was the only thing keeping our household afloat. My paycheck covered the mortgage, the utility bills, and the groceries, while Rick blew his own commission checks on imported beers, golf trips, and his ridiculous sports car lease. Without my money hitting our joint account, Rick was totally stranded. The first of the month rolled around, and the bills started piling up on the kitchen counter. The mortgage payment was due. The car payment was due. The massive minimum payments on his maxed-out credit cards were suddenly staring him right in the face. He had absolutely zero cash flow, and his desperate plan to force the sale of his father's house had completely blown up in his face. He was officially drowning. That is when my cell phone started blowing up. Rick called me 12 times on a Tuesday afternoon. I ignored every single call and let them all go straight to voicemail. When I finally sat down on my friend's couch that evening and listened to the messages, the downward spiral was incredibly pathetic to witness. The first few voicemails were full of pure, unadulterated anger. He was furious that I had moved my money out of our joint account. "You cannot just leave me holding the bag, Clara," Rick yelled into the phone on the first message, his voice echoing loudly like he was pacing around the empty house. "You are my wife. You are legally obligated to help me pay this mortgage. You and my old man completely ruined my life. You stole my inheritance, and now you are trying to bankrupt me. Pick up the phone right now." I just shook my head and tapped the button to play the next message. By the fourth voicemail, the aggressive yelling had faded into a frantic, desperate bargaining tone. "Okay, look, Clara," Rick said, sounding completely out of breath. "Maybe I overreacted a little bit. I was just really stressed out about the debt, okay? But we can fix this. You just need to come home. We can talk to my dad together. If you talk to him, he will listen. He likes you. Just convince him to give us a small loan from his savings so I do not lose the house. Please, Clara. You have to help me fix this." It was honestly sickening. He still refused to take an ounce of accountability for his own terrible choices. He still viewed his father as nothing more than a bank to be robbed, and he wanted me to be the one to go do the robbing for him. The final voicemail came through around 10 o'clock at night. He was clearly drinking heavily. His words were slurred, and he was actually crying. "Please come home, babe," Rick sobbed into the receiver, sounding like a sad, defeated little boy. "The house is so quiet without you. I am sorry. I messed up. I will sell the golf clubs. I will give back the sports car. Just please come back. I cannot do this by myself. I need you, Clara." Listening to that final message, I did not feel an ounce of pity. I did not feel the urge to run back and save him from his own consequences. The illusions were completely gone. I knew exactly who Rick was now. He was not sorry that he abandoned his elderly, injured father at the emergency room. He was not sorry for the emotional and financial abuse he tried to put us both through. He was only sorry because his safety nets had disappeared, and he was finally being forced to face the music entirely on his own. I deleted every single voicemail from my phone. I went into my settings, selected his contact name, and hit the block button. It was the most empowering feeling in the world. I set my phone down on the coffee table, picked up my favorite book, and spent the rest of the evening reading in total peace. The pushback was over. The wall was securely built, and Rick was finally locked out of my life for good. With Rick officially blocked from my phone and entirely shut out of Walter's estate, a brand new normal started to settle over both of our lives. For Walter, it was like a massive, suffocating weight had been lifted off his chest. The man had spent 40 years working his fingers to the bone, and now he was finally getting to enjoy the safety net he had built, completely on his own terms. The irrevocable trust was doing exactly what it was designed to do. It was protecting him and giving him total control over his daily life. A few days after the dust settled with Rick's cheap lawyer, Walter used his protected funds to hire a fantastic part-time nurse to come by the house 3 mornings a week. Her name was Margaret, and she was a no-nonsense retired Army medic who did not take any guff from anybody. She was exactly the kind of person Walter needed in his corner. She helped him diligently with his physical therapy exercises, making sure he was stretching his bruised hip properly and not pushing himself too hard on the bad days. Walter complained about the exercises, of course, grumbling about how he felt like a rusty old tractor. But Margaret just gave it right back to him, teasing him until he cracked a big smile. The two of them ended up getting along like 2 peas in a pod, and I could actually hear Walter laughing out loud from the front porch when I pulled into the driveway. Walter also used the funds from his trust to make some smart, practical upgrades to his mid-century ranch home, so he could continue living there safely for years to come. He hired a local contractor to completely retrofit his first-floor bathroom. They tore out the old, slippery porcelain bathtub that had become a huge fall hazard. In its place, they installed a beautiful wide walk and shower with a sturdy built-in bench. They put up heavy-duty grab bars securely anchored to the wall studs and laid down textured, non-slip floor tiles. Walter paid for the entire remodel in cash, straight from his protected savings. He did not have to ask anyone for permission, and he did not have to worry about going into debt to make his home accessible. That is exactly what a retirement fund is for, and seeing him use it to maintain his dignity and independence was an incredibly beautiful thing to witness. While Walter was busy upgrading his house, I was busy building a peaceful new life of my own. I rented a cozy, bright 1-bedroom apartment on the exact opposite side of town, far away from the neighborhood I used to share with Rick. I bought myself a few new houseplants, set up a comfortable reading nook by the large living room window, and started embracing the total peace and quiet of living alone. But I never stopped checking in on Walter. In fact, without Rick constantly hovering around complaining about his dad, my relationship with Walter actually blossomed into something truly wonderful. We formed a genuine, deep father and daughter bond that existed entirely outside of my broken marriage. Every single Sunday afternoon, I would drive over to his house. I did not do it out of some heavy sense of obligation or lingering guilt. I did it because I genuinely loved spending time with him. We would sit at his kitchen table, drinking hot coffee, and tackle the absolute mountains of confusing mail that seniors always seem to get. I helped him organize everything into neat folders. We navigated through all of his complicated Medicare paperwork together, translating the confusing insurance jargon on the explanation of benefits letters into plain, everyday English so he actually understood his coverage. After the paperwork was sorted out and filed away, we would head to the local supermarket together. I would push the heavy shopping cart while he leaned on it slightly for support, walking slowly but steadily down the long aisles. We would argue jokingly over which brand of baked beans to buy, and we would always stop at the deli counter to get some fresh sliced ham for his weekday lunches. He would always insist on paying for my groceries at the checkout lane, swiping his debit card before I could even reach for my wallet, no matter how much I protested. He told me it was the very least he could do for the woman who stood by him when things got ugly. Those Sunday afternoons became the absolute highlight of my week. They grounded me and reminded me that family is not just about blood relation. True family is about mutual respect, showing up for each other, and treating people with basic human decency. And speaking of basic human decency, it was finally time for me to officially cut the remaining legal ties to the man who had absolutely none. By the time the end of the month rolled around, I sat down in a bright, modern office with a highly recommended family law attorney. Her name was Diane, and she was known around the county for being incredibly thorough. It was time to file the divorce papers and permanently end my marriage to Rick. I walked into that meeting knowing exactly what I wanted out of my future, and more importantly, knowing exactly what I did not want. I sat in a leather chair across from Diane, drinking terrible law office coffee, and told her to make the process as clean, swift, and completely brutal for Rick as legally possible. But I did not mean I was going after his money. In fact, my strategy was the exact opposite. I did not ask for a single dime in spousal support or alimony. I did not want any portion of his retirement accounts, and I certainly did not want to fight over the house we had shared. That house was nothing but a massive financial sinkhole anyway, tied to a mortgage we could barely afford, even with my income combined with his. I told Diane to draw up the paperwork, stating that I would walk away completely cleanly. I was taking only my personal savings, my own car that was entirely paid off, and the personal belongings I had already packed in my suitcases. In exchange for me walking away from the property, Rick would have to take full and total responsibility for the massive mortgage, his ridiculous sports car lease, and every single penny of the $30,000 in credit card debt he had selfishly racked up in his own name. Diane looked over her reading glasses at me and warned me that I was technically entitled to half the equity in the house. She explained that I could force a sale and walk away with a nice little check. But I just shook my head and smiled. I explained to her that fighting over a few $1,000s in home equity would just drag the divorce out in court for months on end. It would force me to stay legally tangled up with a man I entirely despised. I wanted a clean break from his toxic entitlement. My freedom, my peace of mind, and my complete independence were worth way more to me than whatever leftover cash I could squeeze out of a forced home sale. When Rick was finally served with the official divorce papers at his job a few days later, I heard through the mutual grapevine that he threw an absolute temper tantrum in the company parking lot. He read through the settlement offer and realized that I was completely serious. I was not coming back to bail him out. By walking away and washing my hands of the marital assets, I was leaving him completely alone to face the massive mountain of debt he had built with his own two hands. He could not rely on his father's money, and he could no longer rely on my steady paycheck to keep his head above water. Signing my name on that final divorce petition felt like taking in a massive, glorious breath of fresh air after being held underwater for 5 long years. I was finally stepping out of the dark, suffocating shadow of Rick's financial abuse and constant greed. I had a beautiful, safe place to live, a secure job that I loved, and a wonderful father figure who truly respected and valued me. I was completely closing a very painful chapter of my life, but as I walked out of the law office and into the bright afternoon sunshine, the road in front of me looked incredibly clear and full of hope. It was a beautiful Sunday afternoon in late October, and the crisp autumn air had finally chased away the oppressive summer heat. I was over at Walter's house, standing in his kitchen and keeping a watchful eye on a massive pot roast simmering in the slow cooker. The whole house smelled absolutely incredible, filled with the rich aroma of roasted beef, onions, carrots, and savory brown gravy. It was our new Sunday tradition. We would spend the afternoon tackling whatever chores he needed help with, and then we would sit down together for a big, home-cooked family dinner. Walter was doing wonderfully. His bruised hip had completely healed, and he was walking around the house without even a hint of a limp. He was setting the dining room table, carefully laying out the good silverware, and humming an old country tune to himself. It was a picture of perfect, uninterrupted peace. Then, out of nowhere, a loud, aggressive pounding echoed through the hallway. Someone was banging on the heavy wooden front door so hard it actually rattled in the frame. Walter stopped humming immediately. We both looked at each other, confused. We were not expecting any company, and the delivery drivers usually just left packages quietly on the porch. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel and walked quickly toward the entryway. I leaned forward and peeked through the small glass peephole in the front door. My heart instantly skipped a beat, and a cold wave of dread washed over my entire body. It was Rick. He looked absolutely terrible. The cocky, sunburned guy who strutted around in expensive designer golf polos was completely gone. He was wearing a wrinkled button-down shirt that looked like it had been pulled straight out of a dirty laundry basket. He looked thinner. His face was drawn and pale, and he had dark, heavy bags under his eyes. I glanced past his shoulder through the peephole and noticed that his fancy leased sports car was nowhere to be found in the driveway. Instead, an old, beat-up, faded gray sedan was parked haphazardly by the curb. He pounded on the door again, the sound echoing loudly in the quiet house. "Clara!" Rick yelled through the heavy wood, his voice sounding raw and desperate. "I know you are in there. I saw your car. Please open the door. I just need to talk." I took a step back from the door, my hands trembling just a little bit. I looked over at Walter. He had walked out of the dining room and was standing perfectly still in the hallway. He looked incredibly calm, but his jaw was set hard. "Do you want me to call the police?" I whispered to Walter, fully prepared to pull out my cell phone and dial the numbers. Walter shook his head slowly. He stood up completely straight, squaring his shoulders. He looked like the proud, strong factory worker he had been his entire life. "No," Walter said quietly but firmly. "Let him in, Clara. It is time we finish this." I took a deep breath, reached out, and turned the deadbolt. I pulled the heavy front door open and stood firmly in the doorway. Rick practically fell into the house. He smelled like stale coffee and cheap cologne. He did not even look at me. His bloodshot eyes darted frantically around the room until they landed on his father standing in the hallway. Rick did not start yelling this time. He did not demand anything, and he did not act like an arrogant bully. Instead, he completely crumbled. He dropped to his knees right there on the entryway rug, burying his face in his hands, and started sobbing uncontrollably. "Dad, you have to help me!" Rick cried, his voice muffled by his hands. He looked up, his face red and wet with real tears. "I am going to lose everything. The bank sent the final notice on Friday. They are foreclosing on the house. The car got repossessed last night right out of the driveway. I am completely drowning, and I have absolutely nowhere else to go." I stood by the door, completely disgusted by the performance. Just 2 months ago, he was planning to throw this exact man into a state-run nursing facility so he could buy a lake house. Now that his own poor choices had caught up with him, he was suddenly trying to play the role of the desperate, loving son. "I am so sorry for everything I did," Rick begged, dragging himself a few inches forward on his knees. I was out of my mind with stress. "But you cannot just let me go homeless. You have the money sitting right in your accounts. You do not even need it, Dad. Just give me a loan. Just $50,000 to catch up on the mortgage and get the credit card companies off my back. I swear I will pay you back every single penny." Walter did not move a single inch. He just stood there, looking down at the grown man crying on his floor. "I am your only son," Rick wailed, pulling out the ultimate guilt trip. He reached a shaking hand out toward Walter. "You are my family. You are supposed to help family when they fall down. Mom would never want you to do this to me. She would not want to watch me lose everything." The silence that followed was incredibly heavy. The only sound in the house was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the faint bubbling of the pot roast in the kitchen. I watched Walter's face closely. Rick mentioning his late mother was a low, dirty blow. But Walter did not flinch. He did not look sad, and he certainly did not look guilty. He looked profoundly disappointed. "Get up, Rick," Walter said. His voice was not loud, but the absolute crushing authority in it filled the entire room. Rick sniffled and slowly stood up, wiping his nose on his sleeve like a little kid. He looked at his dad with wide, hopeful eyes, actually believing his pathetic guilt trip had worked. "You are absolutely right about one thing," Walter said, looking Rick dead in the eye. "Your mother would be heartbroken if she were here right now. But she would not be heartbroken over a house going into foreclosure. She would be completely heartbroken by the man you have become." Rick's hopeful expression instantly shattered. He opened his mouth to argue, but Walter held up a strong, calloused hand to silence him. "You did not come here to apologize," Walter continued, his voice cold as steel. "You came here because you ran out of money, and you ran out of people to manipulate. You maxed out your credit cards trying to look like a big shot to your buddies. You drove your own wife away because you treated her like a bank account. And when you realized you were broke, you tried to steal from an old man who spent 40 years breaking his back in a factory." "Dad, please," Rick whimpered, shrinking back against the wall. "No," Walter said firmly, stepping forward. "A real man builds his own life instead of waiting for someone else to die to fund it. That money is my safety net. It is the result of my hard work and my sacrifices. It is not a bailout fund for your greed. If the bank takes your house, then you will learn what it actually means to rent a cheap apartment and work a second job to pay your debts. You are going to face the consequences of your own actions entirely on your own." I could see the exact moment the final shred of hope left Rick's body. He looked at Walter, and then he looked over at me. He was waiting for me to jump in and save him, to plead his case, just like I used to do for all those years. But I just stood there, my face totally blank, completely supporting Walter. Rick realized that the tears were not going to work. The angry, arrogant bully flashed across his face for a split second. But he was entirely too broken and defeated to put up a fight. He had absolutely zero leverage left. The vault was sealed shut, and the people he had abused were completely immune to his toxic manipulation. Without saying another word, Rick turned around. His shoulders slumped forward in total, crushing defeat. He walked out the front door, dragging his feet across the concrete porch. He climbed into the beat-up gray sedan, started the noisy engine, and slowly drove away down the suburban street. I reached out and gently pushed the heavy front door shut, turning the deadbolt until it clicked solidly into place. I turned around to look at Walter. He let out a long, heavy sigh, the tension finally leaving his broad shoulders. He looked a little bit older in that moment, carrying the heavy grief of realizing his son was truly lost to his own greed. But there was also a profound sense of peace in his eyes. He had held the line. He had protected his life and his legacy. "Well?" Walter said softly, offering me a small, genuine smile. "I believe our Sunday dinner is just about ready. We should go eat before the potatoes get mushy." I smiled back at him, feeling an overwhelming wave of love and respect for this incredible man. "You are right, Walter. Let us go eat." It has been 6 full months since that explosive Sunday afternoon in Walter's entryway. The dust has finally settled over our lives, and the harsh, biting winter weather has melted away into a beautiful, bright spring. My divorce from Rick was officially finalized in early April. The court proceedings were incredibly fast and remarkably clean, exactly the way I wanted them to be. Because I walked away from the marital house and adamantly refused to fight over the underwater equity. There were no drawn-out legal battles or expensive mediation sessions. I simply took my own name off the sinking ship and let it go under completely. Today, I am living in a cozy, beautiful little townhouse on the quiet side of town. It has a small front porch where I keep a few potted ferns, and the neighbors are incredibly friendly folks who always wave when I check the mail. When I walk through my front door after a long day at the logistics company, I am greeted by total, uninterrupted peace. There is no one waiting to yell at me about money. There are no hidden credit card bills stuffed under the mail pile on the kitchen counter. I even took the time to sit down with a financial advisor and set up my very own individual retirement accounts. Taking control of my own financial destiny after years of constantly cleaning up someone else's disastrous mistakes felt incredibly empowering. For the first time in 5 long years, I am sleeping straight through the night without a single worry in the world. I am finally thriving, building a beautiful life that belongs entirely to me. And I am not the only one doing incredibly well. Walter's golden years are playing out exactly the way he always planned them. His bruised hip has completely healed up, and he is walking around his property without even a hint of a limp. The safety upgrades he made to his first floor bathroom have given him total confidence in his daily independence. Nurse Margaret still comes by the house every Tuesday morning, but honestly, it is mostly just to check his blood pressure and drink a whole pot of coffee with him. They became fast friends, and they spend half the morning arguing good-naturedly over local politics and crossword puzzles. Walter has even started using his free time to volunteer at the local community center, helping other seniors understand their Medicare benefits. He is healthy, active, and deeply respected by everyone who meets him. Most importantly, Walter's finances are completely insulated from Rick's chaos. The irrevocable trust Bob Davis set up is a massive success. The money is securely locked down, earning a modest interest, and keeping Walter completely comfortable. He does not have to worry about Medicaid seizure, and he certainly does not have to worry about his own son trying to force a quitclaim deed on his property. Walter is living with the utmost dignity. He earned every single day of his peaceful retirement through decades of sweat and sacrifice on the factory floor, and nobody can ever take that away from him. The contrast between our peaceful lives and Rick's miserable new reality is honestly staggering. Word gets around in a small town, and you hear things whether you want to or not. Rick did not miraculously save himself at the 11th hour. The bank foreclosed on the house we used to share just a few weeks after the divorce was finalized. He lost the property entirely, and his credit score was absolutely decimated. Today, Rick is living in a cramped, noisy one-bedroom apartment right next to the busy interstate highway. You can hear the heavy semi-trucks rattling the thin windows all night long. He had to trade in his expensive designer golf polos for a thick canvas apron because his regular daytime salary is not nearly enough to cover the massive minimum payments on his remaining $30,000 of unsecured credit card debt. He picked up a second job working the night shift at a big box home improvement store just to keep his head above water. He spends his weekends hauling heavy bags of mulch and loading lumber for customers. The golfing buddies he used to impress completely abandoned him the second he could no longer afford to pick up the expensive bar tabs at the country club. His fancy leased sports car is long gone, replaced by a rusty clunker that barely starts in the morning. He is completely exhausted, broke, and entirely alone. He has to wake up every single day and live with the heavy, crushing regret of his own actions. He threw away a loyal wife and a loving, supportive father, all for a quick payout that never even existed. He gambled his entire life away out of pure greed, and the house absolutely won. But I try not to spend too much time thinking about Rick anymore. I am way too busy enjoying my new family. It is late Sunday afternoon, and I am sitting on Walter's back porch. The sun is shining warmly, and a gentle breeze is rustling through the big oak tree in his yard. We are sitting in a pair of comfortable rocking chairs, drinking hot black coffee and eating thick slices of cherry pie from the local bakery down the street. Walter just told me a ridiculous story about his old days working at the manufacturing plant, and we are both laughing so hard that my sides actually ache. Looking at him sitting there, looking so incredibly healthy and happy, a massive wave of gratitude washes over me. This entire ordeal taught me some of the most valuable lessons of my adult life. Elder financial abuse is a silent epidemic in this country, and it so often happens at the hands of the people you are supposed to trust the most. It taught me the absolute importance of protecting yourself and your assets legally before a crisis hits. It showed me how critical it is to recognize toxic behavior and put an absolute stop to it before it drags you down into the mud. But most importantly, it taught me the true definition of family. True family is not just about who shares your bloodline or who happens to have the same last name printed on a birth certificate. True family is about who actually shows up for you when things get dark. It is about who protects your dignity when you cannot stand up for yourself. Walter and I chose to be family, and I would not trade these peaceful Sunday afternoons on the back porch for all the money in the entire world. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. If this journey resonated with you, or if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members to protect your peace and your hard-earned retirement security, please take a quick second to hit that like button and leave a comment below. We love hearing your thoughts and sharing these important life lessons together. And do not forget to subscribe to the Eva's Whisper channel so you never miss another real-life story. Stay strong, protect your future, and we will see you in the very next video.